In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but what if Columbus never came back from his voyage? Columbus's three ships, the Niña, the Pinta and the Santa Maria, might have run out of water, threatening the lives of all the sailors. They could have been lost at sea or shipwrecked in a storm because they sailed during hurricane season. Or, most likely, Columbus must have reached the Caribbean and never returned to Europe. In fact, Columbus's largest ship, the Santa Maria, ran aground on a Haitian reef. Columbus barely made it back to Europe after his first voyage. So what if Columbus sailed off into the Atlantic and never returned? Would Europe have given up on a western road to Asia, or would all the countries have eventually sent their own voyages? Without silver and gold from the New World flowing into Europe, would the Habsburgs have maintained power? Would the British Empire exist? With less compassion, would the Ottomans have conquered Europe? Without Columbus's voyage, the world's history would look drastically different. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Cherny History channel. If Columbus hadn't landed in America, would Europeans have completely abandoned the idea of a western road to Asia? Would anyone dare to cross the Atlantic, knowing the route had destroyed Columbus' three ships? It's likely that another explorer would have encountered the Americas at some point. But how soon after 1492 would Europeans have attempted to cross the Atlantic? In 1500, Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral landed in Brazil. Cabral wasn't looking for the New World. His fleet had simply swept wide on the journey down the coast of Africa and rode to India. Strong winds landed Cabral in Brazil. Instead, Cabral easily could have been the first European to reach the Americas, and the Portuguese had claimed the entire New World. It would have poured wealth into the Iberian country, completely changed European history. Then Columbus set sail to find a western road to Asia. Portuguese explorers had already shown how promising the eastern road might be. In 1488, Bartolomeu Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Just a decade later, Vasco da Gama sailed to India. Over the course of the 16th century, Portugal established numerous ports on the coasts of Africa, India, China, and even Japan. Without competition from Spain's New World, Portugal would have dominated Europe's trade networks, while the Ottomans and Italians might have maintained their power in the Mediterranean. Portugal would have benefited from the wealth of Asia trade. Recently, Portuguese President Aníbal Cavaco Silva declared, "The roads that the Portuguese created to connect the continents and oceans are the foundation of the world we inhabit today." In the absence of Spanish competition, Portugal's dominance likely would have been even greater. China's dominant Ming dynasty sent out its own voyages of discovery during the 15th century. Under Admiral Cheng He, the China's fleet traveled to India and Africa. However, the Ming quickly took an isolationist turn, declaring China the only civilized part of the world. While European traders had a presence in China, they had to acknowledge China's superiority. European power, which would have been weaker without their New World colonies, would have struggled to break into the Chinese market, likely playing an even smaller role in China's trade. As a result, China would have continued its role as the dominant power in Asia. With less competition from European power, especially Portugal and the Dutch, China would have controlled trade throughout Southeast Asia. Before European contact with North America, several Native American groups they are transforming into confederacies. The Iroquois Confederacy, made up of 5 nations: the Mohawks, Senecas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Oneidas, dominated from the Great Lakes to New York. They often battled the Algonquic nations for territory in the northeast. Prior to Spanish contact, California was home to 300,000 Native Americans broken into about 100 tribes. While relations between tribes are usually peaceful, the separate groups may have consolidated over the 7th and 18th centuries. Aztec expansion might have even reached into California. Without the massive drop in population due to European disease plus displacement, forced labor and extermination, North American tribes might have consolidated into several dominant confederacies that could have controlled large amounts of territory. The Ottomans laid siege to Vienna twice in the early modern period. Both times the Habsburgs were able to turn back the invaders, but things would have looked different without the Habsburgs' allies in Spain, who controlled a massive empire in the New World. By 1500, the Ottoman Empire dominated much of the international trade flowing into Europe. As the rulers of Istanbul, the Ottomans controlled trade coming from the Black Sea and the Near East. Their navy sailed the Mediterranean nearly unchallenged. Without a strong rival in the Central Europe, the Ottomans might have continued their march into Central Europe, conquering Vienna much like they conquered Constantinople. In the 15th century, Italy's city-states flourished during the Renaissance. They spread cultural, political and social ideas to the rest of Europe. However, Columbus's voyage and the emphasis on New World colonization eclipsed the Italian Renaissance. None of the Italian city-state could compete in the race for colonies, thanks in part to their smaller size compared with the dominant powers of the Age of Discovery. However, without the discovery of the Americas, the Italian Renaissance might have continued. In the early 16th century, Italy may have fought off invasions from France and Spain, extending Italy's Renaissance well into the early modern period. Spain initiated a couple decades before Columbus's voyage. Then Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon shared the crowns. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs exploited Spanish Jews' population and conquered Granada, ending the last Muslim kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula. With the discovery of the New World, gold and silver poured into Spain, propping up the newly united kingdom. But without wealth from the New World, Spain might easily have crumbled back into competing kingdoms. A poorer Spain might not have successfully pushed out Muslim and Jews from their country, creating a more diverse, less united Iberia. If Columbus hadn't made it to the Americas, some European voyage would have eventually reached the New World. The Portuguese might have discovered Brazil and concentrated their efforts on colonizing South America. Another European power would have risked the voyage across the North Atlantic to land in North America and found new colonies. The most likely European country to colonize North America in the 16th century would have been France. In fact, France did found a massive colony in North America. Instead of competing with the Spanish, France would have colonized much of the east coast, feeding of Dutch rivals. Instead of winning independence from the British, the United States might have grown out of a French colony, like Canada, or even a Dutch colony. As a result, people in the US would speak French or Dutch instead of English. In the 15th century, West Africa was dominated the Mali Empire. Before Columbus's voyage, Mali dominated a territory larger than the Western Europe, applying a sophisticated political system to control its empire. The Mali Empire enriched itself with trade, including important commodities like gold and salt. By around 1500, a new dominant power rose in West Africa, the Songhai Empire, which controlled trans-Saharan trade routes. However, West Africa eventually devolved into competing near-boring states, in part because of a new trade network, the Atlantic slave trade. Without European demand for slaves in the New World, West African states like the Mali and Songhai empires would have continued to grow and consolidate power. The year 1492 was an important one for Russia. The King of Poland passed it, and his weak successor eventually ceded his Baltic territory to Ivan the Great. Ivan also conquered the Mongols, transforming Central Asia into ripe territory for Russian conquest. Russia's strategic position gave it access to Asia trade without having to pass through hostile Ottoman territories. With less competition from Habsburg ruler, the Russians might have expanded their empire even faster, transforming themselves into a dominant world power. For centuries, Russia fought the Ottomans, but the balance might have tipped in Russia's favor with stronger European trade passing through Russian lands. After all, without the resources of the New World, Europeans would still clamor for Asian trade, which the Russians could prove it. England was slow to colonize the New World in comparison to their European rivals Spain, Portugal, France and even the Dutch, but without their North American colonies, which made up the vast majority of Britain's overseas empire, by 1750 England might not have become a major European power. Britain used the North American colonies to fuel their expansion, and the colonies also became an important outlet for religious dissenters. The British might not have established control of India without the experience and the wealth from the American colonies. However, by the 18th century, as the Industrial Revolution dawned, Britain's major coast reserves likely would have made the Iceland an attractive resource. It's even possible that another power, like the Russians or the Ottomans, would have colonized England for the coal. So, this is the Cherny History channel, and sorry for my English.